I have a beef, and I don't just mean a delicious Italian beef sandwich, but my beef is that someone decided that both the Petronas Towers and One World Trade Center are somehow taller than my beloved Sears. Damn it, I mean Willis Tower. This upsets me both as an architecture snob and as a Chicagoan. I mean, look at this. Both of these towers are clearly shorter. Its pointy things are shorter than the Sears Tower pointy things up here, and Sears Tower has Willis Tower has two of these pointy things, and its roof is clearly higher. Is it shrinking or something? What gives? Turns out I'm not alone in my outrage, just decades too late.
Today, in one corner, New York's World Trade Center, here in New York, of course. Now, in the other corner, we have Chicago's Willis Tower, which rises to a height of 1,450 feet.
This was peak controversy in 1996, and then again in 2010. That's when those substandard monstrosities, they dethroned my boxy beauty, first as the world's tallest, and then as America's tallest. People in Chicago went ballistic, both times. Frankly, I don't blame them.
Everyone here knows that our beloved Willis, or some may still call it Sears Tower, is the tallest.
Turns out that measuring the height of skyscrapers is just as controversial as declaring the best Italian beef. But measuring buildings should be objective, not some matter of opinion. But when I look at the relative heights of these towers, and you're telling me that this is the shortest, I feel like I'm being gaslit. Who decides this stuff anyway? Wait, it says right here, the Council on Tall Buildings and Urban Habitat. I know them. I just did a video with them about sky bridges. And they're in Chicago. How could they be responsible for this ridiculousness? So I emailed the director of CTBUH. I told him to meet me by the river.
What's the problem? That changing criteria resulted in this. And this was the first CTBUH signboard we ever installed around the world.
It turns out that they set the standards for how we measure the height of buildings. How could they have bungled this so hard? So how do you determine this order? Because to me, it seems obvious that the Sears Tower is taller. I allowed Dr. Anthony Wood to plead his case.
This building here with the huge, where's the height of that building? You know?
I feel like you could have changed the criteria so that Sears Tower could have stayed the king.
No.
Even in the early days, measuring the tallest building wasn't a simple task. The first skyscraper, usually listed nowadays, in hindsight, is the Home Insurance Building. It was built in Chicago in 1885, and it sat right here at the corner of Adams and Clark. It was 12 stories tall and measured 55 meters or 180 feet from the curb to the top of the facade. While we can't confirm its height now because it was demolished, we'll have to take people's word for it. Even so, measuring the building wasn't that hard, but declaring it the world's tallest skyscraper because it was the first one in 1885? That's not so simple. What if I told you that in 1885, New York already had a building that was taller? The New York Tribune building was 260 feet or almost 80 meters tall, and it was built in 1875. So for those of you keeping score at home, that is 25 meters taller and 10 years earlier than the Home Insurance Building. Loophole number one, that building in New York wasn't technically a skyscraper. Turns out height alone does not a skyscraper make. I mean, that sort of makes sense if you think about it. The Washington Monument or the Eiffel Tower aren't buildings. They're certainly not skyscrapers. And they were, in fact, taller than a lot of the skyscrapers for quite some time. But the term skyscraper is reserved for a building that has a frame-based structural system, so it's not held up by the walls. And the facade needs to hang off of that frame system. Can't hold itself up by gravity alone.
So the development of the skyscraper came about through a number of things, but predominantly the metal frame, which the facade then is hung off it in what's known as a curtain wall, because it's literally like curtain, hung from floor to floor rather than load bearing.
And the Home Insurance Building is the first one to meet that criteria. But there's an asterisk here. This definition might seem a little arbitrary, but that frame and facade solution has been copied ever since, and it's what allowed for the explosion of skyscrapers to date. So buildings which might have been taller, like the one in New York, that used older and limited construction technologies, weren't technically skyscrapers, even though the New York Tribune building was taller and it was called a skyscraper at the time. I know. Either way, in 1931, the Empire State Building claimed the undisputed title as world's tallest skyscraper, 1,250 feet or 380 meters tall as measured from the curb of 34th Street to the tip of its spire. Those stats were good enough to hold on to that coveted title for 41 years. All was right in the world? Well, not really. For the next couple decades, people were too distracted to care about what building was the tallest. By the 1960s, people started to care again, and my beloved Sears Tower was squarely part of the zeitgeist. The same engineering fever that fueled the space race fueled the American desire to create ever taller buildings.
In the late 60s, these projects were doing the architectural equivalent of walking on the moon.
Right.
And we were walking on the moon at that time. And I think it's an apt description.
I guess Americans just wanted to get as far away from the land of Earth as possible. Going tall and what it meant was scrutinized at every level. There was a complete rethinking of how tall buildings were engineered and of setting the definitions and criteria for how to measure them. That's where CTBUH was founded.
And I think there was a real pride around the creation of tall buildings and what America was doing, creating, these buildings that were technological, like NASA walking on the moon, It was like doing, and we at the CTBUH wanted to spread that learning out around the whole world.
It was a nonprofit to share that knowledge and to set those standards. They found that even defining what a tall building is can be difficult. It's not objective at all. According to them, they are buildings that exhibit some element of tallness in one of more of the following categories. First, it must be relatively higher than its surroundings. So a 20-story building here in Chicago wouldn't be considered tall today. Second, it must be taller than it is wide, so its proportion matters. And finally, a tall building must utilize tall building technology. That's the loophole that the home insurance building was a part of. But back to that race to get away from Earth, which first yielded the World Trade Center in 1971, then my beloved Sears Tower only a year later. There it is, standing tall in all of its glory, 1,454 feet, or 443 meters from the curve of Jackson Boulevard to the top of the roof. It's so tall that its height was limited only by restrictions set by the Federal Aviation Administration, because otherwise it would interfere with airline traffic patterns. They're always such a buzzkill. But Sears Tower was the tallest building in the world, and all was right again until that ill-fated day in 1998.
We're now taller than the Sears Tower. This is the tallest building in the world.
The title tallest buildings in the world now belong to Kuala Lumpur.
So 1998, Sears Tower loses the title of world's tallest to Petronas Towers.
Right.
And when you look at these two buildings in silhouette or in section,
Right.
you will see that Sears Tower looks a hell of a lot taller than Petronas. The pinnacle...
Point made, cut.
Yeah, the pinnacle of Petronas is about here relative to the two spires of Sears.
Right.
And for sure, there are people working in a permanent capacity up here,
Right.
kind of way above where they're working at the top of Petronas.
Sounds like you're making my point.
But here's the thing, the top of Petronas is considered a spire, and these two things at the top of Sears are considered antennae. So let's look at some more examples.
Yeah.
You
Right.
see that, it morphs into this
pyramid,
spire at the top. Yeah. Very famous Hancock Tower over there. The twin antennae, you can even see them blinking. That is like Sears Tower. Look at this one. So this building here with the huge, where's the height of that building? Because people were emotively reacting and saying, well, the height of Sears is this, but would you really say that it's the height of that antennae there?
I can see how this is all a little murkier than I originally considered.
We count spires an integral part of the vision of the architecture, never to be added to, never to be taken away. We don't count antennae, right?
Even if we look back to the Empire State Building, the height of 1,250 feet, that actually doesn't count the antenna on top. If it did, it would be considered 1,454 feet or taller than the World Trade Center. And it gets worse. The original World Trade Center had an antenna on it too, and that antenna is taller than the Sears Tower antenna ever were. So I guess I should be grateful we had a good run. To continue to prove how difficult this all is, we headed back down to the ground to see how things get even more complicated down at the base of these things.
When it comes to measuring tall building height, it's the tops of the buildings that get all the attention. Is it a spire, is it an antenna? But actually the base of the building is just as interesting and just as controversial. So, criteria used to say, the building is measured from the sidewalk outside the front entrance. But when you look at this building from across the river or from here, you will see that it's actually 40 feet taller.
Okay.
And if you were on the other side of the river looking at this, you would not say that building is 40 feet shorter just because of that sidewalk. The reality is that this whole area that we're on in Chicago is raised ground. The ground is down at the level of the Riverwalk, more or less. And this, although it feels like ground, it is a raised ground by 2 stories. So we had to change our criteria from saying sidewalk outside the front entrance to height is measured from the level of the lowest pedestrian open air restaurant. Entrance, not restaurant. That changing criteria resulted in this. And this was the first CTBUH signboard we ever installed around the world.
CTBUH now grants these fancy plaques to buildings recognized for their achievements. So for those of you who are still keeping score at home, I'll put the important definitions on screen. Feel free to pause the video to review them more carefully. Don't forget to read the footnotes. Height is measured from the level of the lowest significant open-air pedestrian entrance to the architecture at the top of the building, including spires but not including antenna, signage, flagpoles, or other functional technical equipment. Ironically, declaring these titles on plaques shows just how quickly things change. While Petronas did dethrone the Willis Tower in 1996, today neither of them even cracked the top 20. Here they are way down at the 19th tallest in the world, and the Willis Tower way down here at number 24. There's been an absolute explosion in the construction of tall buildings. There are many more towers built annually than ever before, and they're much taller more consistently.
Even in the 1990s, as this started to happen, or in the earlier period, the entire world was constructing about 12 buildings above 200 meters, which is about 660 feet, yeah? The last decade, that was 112 buildings per year. So it had increased by a factor of tenfold over the space of 2 or 3 decades.
But you can't discount the bragging rights that goes with having the tallest buildings as an important factor in why developers choose to reach for that title. Building tall and getting that certification is big business. In addition to adding rentable floor area and the revenue for having those tall antennae up there, the recognition that goes with completing the tallest structures can be the difference between an anonymous tower and an icon recognized around the world.
You get the title of the world's tallest building, or any title at all, and that makes a big difference in terms of almost free promotion of the project.
Building tall is a collective expression of pride and ingenuity, and it forms identities. The Willis Tower hung on to its other records for dear life as long as it could. It was the world's tallest steel building. It was also the world's largest building with 418,000 square meters of office space. It also had the highest occupied floor at 436 meters, and also the highest at the top of the roof at 442 meters. Today, the Willis Tower is none of those things, but the legacy of having held those records and the pride that locals still feel for the building, it still exists. And it's big money too. A typical year brings about 1.7 million people to the Skydeck. That adds up to over $30 million per year. Much of this race and the understanding of the height of buildings has so far been about semantics. If you're this far and you're still wondering how we literally measure buildings, well, we just take the architect's word for it. The drawings show the height, and that's how it's determined by CTBUH. Of course, measurements are made literally during construction. Surveyors use trigonometry and vertical viewing angles and use an instrument called a theodolite. These are used in conjunction with a total station and can measure things up to 1,500 meters away, or 4,900 feet, with an accuracy of about 1.5 millimeters over that distance, or 2 parts per million. Well, I'm still pissed off about this whole Willis Tower thing, that it's somehow shorter than Petronas or One World Trade Center. Could we dig an entrance lower in Sears Tower so that we could win it back? And I'm offended that a Chicago organization would give the title from that building to one that appears much shorter. It's also mostly just a vanity metric anyway. It's not just about how tall you build, it's about how well you build tall. Or at least that's what I tell myself when I drown my feelings in my next Italian beef sandwich. When you give to charity, how much impact does your donation actually have? This question can be hard, if not impossible, to answer. Most charities can't tell you how your money will be used or how much good it will accomplish. You may know that it could theoretically help a cause, but how? Or more importantly, how much? If you want to help people living in poverty with evidence-backed, high-impact charities, I recommend that you check out GiveWell. GiveWell spends over 40,000 hours each year researching charitable organizations, and it only directs funding to a few of the highest impact, evidence-backed opportunities that they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $1 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 150,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. And using GiveWell's research is free. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. They allocate your tax-deductible donation to the charity or fund that you choose without taking a cut. I give to bed nets because their $5 nets help prevent malaria infections around the globe by protecting children while they sleep. If you've never donated to GiveWell's recommended charities before, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year or as long as the matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org and pick YouTube and enter Stewart Hicks at the checkout. Make sure they know that you heard about GiveWell from Stewart Hicks to get your donation matched. And as always, thank you for watching.